I don't even know where to begin anymore. Because every time I look back to when it was just me and Scott, it feels like I'm replaying a life that never truly belonged to me. A different world. A gentler one. A time before everything warped into the mess I ended up creating, before I shattered the only man who ever stood by me, and the only father my daughter ever knew as safe. Those early years feel like a faded photograph. Warm, soft around the edges, full of a kind of love I didn't realize I was capable of losing. But somewhere along the line, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the loneliness I never admitted. Or maybe it was the part of me I kept pretending didn't exist. All I know is this: the woman I used to be would barely recognize the one telling this story now. So stay with me till the end, because what I'm about to share isn't just a confession, it's a collapse. A warning. And the truth behind how I broke the one person who never stopped choosing me, even on the days I didn't deserve it. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Infidelity Stories, where every secret comes with a consequence and every confession leaves a scar. My name is Vivian. Back then I was 27, freshly divorced, raising a 6-year-old girl named Diane. Her father was technically alive somewhere in the world, but not in any way that counted. He had slipped out of her life when she was still in diapers, leaving nothing but the occasional guilt-driven $100 check, barely enough to fill a grocery cart, let alone patch the wound of abandonment he left behind. I was barely surviving. I worked part-time at a daycare, just enough money to keep the lights on and food on the table. I drove an old Honda that coughed black smoke every time I turned the key, like it was begging to retire before its wheels fell off. My days were an endless loop of financial panic, mom guilt, exhaustion, and the constant feeling that I was failing at everything. I was lonely. I was tired. I was drowning. And then, Scott walked into my life. We met at a neighborhood cookout my friend practically dragged me to. I remember holding Diane's little hand, trying to pretend I wasn't falling apart from the inside out. And out of nowhere, Scott approached us. 31 years old, steady presence, rough hands from honest work, and eyes that carried a quiet kind of safety. He introduced himself with this warm, effortless smile. One of those smiles that makes you believe even for a second that things might turn out okay. Diane hid behind my legs, shy as ever. He didn't tease her or push her. He just crouched down at her level, said a gentle hello, and let her hide if she needed to. I don't know why that moment embedded itself so deeply in me, but it did. Maybe because so many men I'd met after the divorce didn't even acknowledge Diane's existence. They only saw me. But Scott saw us. We started dating soon after, slowly, carefully. I was terrified of introducing another man into my daughter's world only to watch him leave. But Scott didn't disappear. He kept showing up. He made Diane laugh. He fixed my dying car without complaining. He treated me with a respect I had forgotten I even deserved. A few months into dating, Diane took a fall off her bike while I was at work. The daycare called Scott, since I'd listed him as an emergency contact. He rushed over without hesitation, cleaned her knee, put on a princess band-aid, and stayed with her until she stopped crying. That night, Diane whispered something to him, something that shifted everything. "Thanks, Daddy." Not Mr. Scott. Not Scott. Daddy. When he told me, I felt gratitude knot itself with fear and hope so tightly I could barely breathe. Diane had been silently longing for a father, and Scott stepped into that space with no hesitation, like he'd been waiting for the role without realizing it. When Diane turned 7, Scott and I got married. She proudly insisted on being both the flower girl and the ring bearer because, as she announced, "It's my wedding too." And honestly, it really was. Those first years of marriage were golden. The kind of golden you don't appreciate until it's gone. Scott didn't just act like Diane's dad. He became her dad in every way that truly matters. They built traditions together. Saturday pancake breakfast, Home Depot project days. Ridiculous inside jokes that made them both laugh until their sides hurt. When she turned 8, he even started a college fund for her, $50 every week no matter what. Back then, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Scott was the man I had once prayed for. A hard worker, a business co-owner, a stable presence, and above all, a loving father to a child who desperately needed one. But golden moments don't last forever. When Diane entered high school, the shift was small at first. Normal teenage moods, eye rolls, one-word answers, closed bedroom doors. I thought nothing of it. But then her attitude toward Scott changed. Subtly at first, then sharply. She stopped calling him Dad. Her tone became cold, dismissive. She started wanting more expensive clothes, the latest phone, a car that kept up with her friends' lifestyles. Scott, being practical and careful with money, tried to set boundaries. And me? I defended her every time. She's figuring herself out, I'd say. She just wants to fit in. I thought I was protecting her, loving her, supporting her. But what I was really doing was undermining the man who had given his entire heart to both of us. The moment I will never forget was her 16th birthday. Scott had saved for months to buy her a Honda Civic. Safe, dependable, responsible. He was proud. He thought she'd be excited. Instead, Diane looked at it like it was an insult. Seriously? A Civic? Jenna's stepdad got her a BMW. I guess he actually cares. I watched Scott's face twist, not with anger but with hurt so deep it practically echoed. His jaw tightened. His eyes dimmed. He tried to explain that he wanted her to have something safe, something reliable. But Diane cut him down with the cruelty only teenagers can deliver. My real dad would have understood. The argument exploded. Scott reminded her, rightfully, that her real father had abandoned her, that he had missed every milestone while Scott had been there for all of it. She rolled her eyes, dismissed him. And me? I tried to keep the peace, tried to calm Scott down, tried to stop the embarrassment. I didn't defend him. I didn't correct her. I didn't stand by the man who had raised her. And that choice broke something. Things kept spiraling. Diane demanded more. Scott stood his ground. And I, trying to avoid conflict, sided with my daughter again and again, without even realizing it. The final crack came during a dinner party Scott hosted for his friends. He mentioned, casually, proudly, that he'd saved enough in Diane's college fund to cover a state school. Without even lifting her eyes from her phone, Diane announced she got accepted to NYU, as if the cost was nothing. When Scott gently brought up finances, she exploded in front of everyone. She called him stingy, made him the villain, and then delivered the fatal blow. You're not my dad. You're just some guy who pays for stuff. Everyone froze, and instead of correcting her, instead of protecting the man who had protected us for a decade, I turned on him. Don't lecture my child. If you want a parent so badly, maybe you should have your own kids. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Scott's face in that moment, I will never forget it. I watched something inside him finally collapse, something I had been chipping away at for years without even realizing it. That night, Scott shut down completely. He barely spoke a word, barely even looked at me. And by sunrise, he was gone. Everything, his bank accounts, his belongings, his presence, vanished like someone had hit a switch. Divorce papers filed. Decision made. No warning, no discussion. Just gone. Waking up that morning felt like opening my eyes in a stranger's home. Instinctively, I reached across the bed for him, only to touch the cold, untouched sheet where he should have been. When I opened the closet, half of it was empty. His shirts, his tools, his jackets, missing. The drawers hung open like someone had packed in a panic, leaving only metal hangers behind. At first, I convinced myself he was just angry, cooling off at Steve's place, maybe needing a night or two to breathe. But then I walked into the kitchen. On the counter, perfectly aligned like a cruel display, were the divorce papers. Organized neatly, signed already, final in a way my brain refused to accept. I just stared. My mind couldn't connect the words on the page with the man I knew. It felt like the letters were floating, like the papers belonged to someone else. But there it was, Scott was done. Panic set in hard and fast. Scott wasn't just my husband, he was our foundation, our protector. The one person who always knew how to calm the storms in my life. Losing him wasn't just emotional, it was like losing oxygen. I called him. No answer. I texted him, begged him to come home, begged him to talk to me. Hours later, he finally responded with one sentence. "It's too late, Vivian." Those 4 words shattered me. That afternoon, Diane came home from school. I tried to hold myself together, but when she asked, "Where's Scott?" the dam broke. I choked out the truth, that he'd left, that he wanted a divorce. I expected a tear, a gasp, something. But instead she shrugged. Good. He was always too controlling anyway. Her indifference crushed me. How could she be so cold toward the man who stepped into her life when her biological father couldn't be bothered? The man who helped with homework, attended recitals, fixed her first car, cheered at every milestone? Yet all I could do was stare at her, wondering how I had raised a child who couldn't see what she'd just lost. The next few weeks blurred into a nightmare of attorneys, paperwork, and silent hostility. Scott didn't yell or accuse. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply detached, cleanly, quietly, like the marriage meant nothing anymore. The college fund he built for Diane? Redirected into his retirement account. The house. He fought for it, and rightfully won. It had been his long before I came along. Diane and I ended up in a cramped little apartment that smelled like damp carpet and broken dreams. Thin walls, leaky faucets, constant arguments from the neighbors. Diane hated every minute of it. She reminded me every single day that Scott's absence was ruining her life. You should have tried harder. You should have made him stay. Every accusation hit exactly where it hurt. Because deep down, I knew I had pushed him away. I replayed that dinner party over and over in my head. The moment I scolded him instead of supporting him. Diane's smirk. His eyes turning cold when I snapped, "Don't lecture my child." My child. Not our child. One careless sentence that erased years of effort and love. Scott filed the divorce like a man who had mourned the relationship already, long before I understood it was dying. By the time everything was finalized, it felt like he had deleted us from his world entirely. No calls. No messages. No visits. Diane pretended she didn't care, but the cracks showed. She skipped school, hung around with kids who pulled her in the wrong direction, acted out more than ever. She would never admit it, but she missed him. She just didn't know how to voice it. As for me, I missed him in ways that physically hurt. Every dinner reminded me of his empty chair. Every hardware store reminded me of their Saturday trips. Every plumber's van made my heart jump, wondering for a split second if it was him. But pride kept me silent. Years passed. Diane scraped through high school and insisted on applying to NYU, clinging to the dream she flaunted so confidently at Scott's dinner table. We couldn't afford it, but I co-signed the loans, desperate not to be the reason her dream collapsed. She lasted one semester. Books, housing, tuition, the money evaporated, and she came home furious, blaming me for not being able to provide like Scott once did. By then, I had remarried, thinking a new partner might fix the fractures in our lives. He seemed promising at first, but he wasn't Scott. He didn't bond with Diane. And eventually he didn't love me either. Another divorce. Another failure. By Diane's early 20s, our life had disintegrated. The car Scott bought her? Repossessed. Loans? Crushing us. I lost my daycare job. Bills piled up. Hope drained away. And then, on a desperate, humiliating afternoon, I did what I swore I'd never do. I went back to Scott. I still remember clutching my purse like it was holding the last pieces of my life together. Diane stood beside me, older but beaten down by exhaustion rather than rebellion. There was shame in her silence, even though she tried to hide it. When Scott opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. He looked almost the same, just older, more weathered, but still steady, still grounded. "Oh, Scott. Scott, please," I whispered. "We need help." He didn't move, didn't step aside, just stared at us like we were ghosts from a life he'd buried. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe he'd soften. Maybe he'd let us in. But then I saw it. The wall I had forced him to build, brick by brick, through years of disrespect, betrayal, and wounds that never fully healed. "What happened?" he asked, his tone flat, emotionless. "The money's gone," I admitted, shaking. "The loans, the car, everything. We have nowhere left to go." For a moment, it looked like his expression wavered. But then he let out a bitter laugh and said, "What do you want me to do, Vivian? Trade you in for another try? I'm not a used car dealer." The words stung more than anything he'd ever said. He turned his gaze to Diane. Something flickered there, pain, disappointment, maybe the ghost of the love he once had for her. "You told me I wasn't your father," he said quietly. "And you were right." I opened my mouth to beg, to say anything, but Scott shut the door before a single word could escape me. And in that tiny, devastating moment, I finally understood the full weight of what I had thrown away. I hadn't only lost a husband or the financial stability that once held us together, I had lost the one man who had ever truly stepped up as a father to my daughter. And I was the one who pushed him out. When the door clicked shut, something inside me cracked. Deep, final, irreversible. It wasn't just rejection. It was the realization that the safety net I had relied on for years was gone. I used to comfort myself with this idea that no matter how ugly life got, Scott would never really abandon us. That somewhere beneath the hurt, he couldn't bring himself to turn his back on Diane, or on me. But he did. And I couldn't even blame him. Diane and I walked back to the car in complete silence. She didn't scream or break down. She just stared through the window as I drove, her jaw locked tight, her eyes shining with a sadness she refused to acknowledge. I wanted to reach across the seat, take her hand, promise her I'd fix everything, but I didn't. I didn't know if she would pull away. That night, the emptiness swallowed me whole. In our tiny apartment, I sat alone with a stack of old photos. Scott pushing Diane on a swing, her sitting on his shoulders, both of them covered in sawdust after building their crooked little treehouse. The grin she gave him when he surprised her with her first bike. Each picture cut deeper than the last. All those moments, all that love, and I had let it slip through my fingers. Desperation makes people foolish. So I did something foolish. I went on Facebook. I posted an old photo of Scott and Diane. She was 6, running off the soccer field, flinging her arms around him like he was her whole world. And then I wrote a long, emotional caption about how he had raised her for 13 years, how he had turned his back when she needed him most. I painted myself as the wounded ex-wife. I painted Diane as the abandoned daughter. And for a moment, it worked. Friends flooded the comments with outrage. They called Scott heartless, cold, a man who chose money over love. Some even shared the post. For a brief, pathetic second, I felt vindicated. But then everything blew up in my face. Because Scott kept receipts, real receipts. Bank records of the braces he paid for, the school trips, the clothes, the college fund. He had text messages too. Messages from Diane demanding expensive things, threatening tantrums when she didn't get her way. And he didn't just stash them away. He made a video. The first time someone tagged me, I felt my stomach drop. When I clicked the link, there he was, Scott, sitting in front of a camera, speaking calmly, steadily, telling his side of the story. He talked about how Diane once called him Daddy, how he raised her like she was his blood, how I told him he wasn't her real father, how I scolded him for trying to act like one. He laid everything out, every wound, every sacrifice, every truth I had buried. He didn't rant or curse. He didn't attack. He simply told the truth, and the internet devoured it. Comments poured in by the thousands. Strangers who had never met us called me manipulative, selfish, entitled. They called Diane spoiled, cruel, ungrateful. Suddenly, no one saw her as a struggling young woman. They saw her as the villain of Scott's story. All the sympathy I had gathered online evaporated in hours. My post was screenshotted, dragged, mocked across platforms. People called me the kind of mother who destroys good men. They said Diane didn't deserve someone like Scott. I watched my entire reputation crumble. Diane, scrolling through the comments with trembling hands, suddenly hurled her phone across the room. "Why did you do that, Mom? Why did you post about him?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw something worse than anger. I saw heartbreak. A week later, she deleted every social media account she had. The same girl who once filled her feed with selfies and laughter disappeared from the online world completely. She stopped going out, stopped replying to her friends, spent hours staring at the ceiling, silent and unreachable. And I had no one to blame but myself. Weeks passed and the spiral continued. I lost my job entirely. No business wanted to hire the woman who had become a viral cautionary tale. Diane couldn't face her classmates again. The shame swallowed her whole. We were sinking, fast. And every time I thought about begging Scott for one more chance, that painful line from his video echoed in my mind. You told me I wasn't her father. You agreed. Now live with the consequences. Those words replayed in my head every night. Eventually, my cousin offered us a place to stay. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was better than the eviction notice taped to our front door. Diane and I packed what little we had left and moved in. And that's when the whispers started. Neighbors, co-workers, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, everyone had seen the video. Whenever I went to the grocery store, I felt their eyes on me. Whenever Diane applied for jobs, she was met with polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. It was as if Scott's video had branded us forever. Diane grew more resentful by the day. Every argument ended with her reminding me of the same thing. That I had chosen her side over Scott's, even when she was wrong. And the truth was cruel. I had belittled Scott, ignored his pain, dismissed his efforts, all while pretending I was protecting my child. But all I had done was push away the man who wanted nothing more than to love her. The worst part? Scott moved on. He rebuilt his life, his business flourished, he bought a new house. And the terrifying truth was that he seemed happier without us. Maybe he deserved to be. Because when I replayed that dinner party over and over in my mind, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit. Scott didn't want luxury. He didn't want praise. He didn't want control. He wanted respect. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted to be Diane's father. And I denied him all of it. Years later, Diane and I sat in my cousin's small living room, two ghosts of the people we used to be. I looked at my daughter, worn down, bitter, exhausted, and wondered if I had destroyed not just my marriage, but her future too. All because I refused to stand by the man who stood by us for over a decade. It's been years since Scott walked out of our lives, but the pain still feels fresh, like an old wound that refuses to heal. He moved forward. We fell apart. After the video, after the comments, after the humiliation. Diane and I learned to survive in the shadows of our own mistakes. Diane eventually took a job waitressing at a diner. Not glamorous, not what she dreamed of when she fantasized about NYU, but it was something. She'd come home late, shoulders slumped, apron stained, exhaustion written all over her. I tried to keep things normal, cooked dinner, asked about her day, but she barely responded. The bright little girl who once laughed through sprinklers in the backyard. That girl was gone. And I was the reason why. In the mirror of my mistakes, I barely recognized the woman staring back. The softness I once carried, the hope, the warmth, all of it had been chipped away over the years. In its place stood someone hardened by disappointment, worn down by regret, and bruised by the consequences of her own choices. And the painful truth is this: I can't blame anyone but myself, because I helped break the life we once built. I replay my years with Scott like a bittersweet film stuck on an endless loop. The memory of him lifting Diane out of the back seat when she fell asleep during long drives still hurts. How he scraped together money for her future, even when she was only 8 and he had nothing extra to give. How he never missed a school event, a bruised knee, a birthday, a moment. He was there for everything. And then there was the moment I erased all of that with one careless sentence. Don't lecture my child. Not our child. Not your daughter. Just mine. That day, I didn't only snap at him, I shattered something sacred. Sometimes I tell myself it came out wrong, that I was stressed, that I didn't mean it the way it sounded. But deep down, I know better. Words matter. And in that moment, mine cut deeper than any betrayal could. When Scott finally walked away, he didn't just take his clothes or his tools. He carried out the respect I failed to give him. And without respect, love can't breathe. 5 long years crawled by. Scott rebuilt himself piece by piece. People whispered that his business was booming, that he'd upgraded to a bigger home, that he looked lighter, happier, peaceful. He never remarried, not that I ever heard. Maybe he finally learned that peace is sometimes enough. Meanwhile, Diane and I were barely staying afloat. I jumped between odd jobs, none of them lasting more than a few months. Diane took a waitressing job and never pursued the college dreams she used to talk about every night at dinner. And then one afternoon, life twisted the knife in a way I never expected. I was running errands when Diane called. Her voice trembled so badly she sounded like a child again. "Mom," she whispered, breath shaky. He came in. My whole body froze. "Oh, Scott." My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear her breathing. She went quiet and then her voice broke. He looked at me, just looked, and I couldn't move. I couldn't even say hi. I pictured it so clearly, Diane in that diner, tray in hand, frozen in place as Scott's eyes met hers. Years of regret, guilt, and longing compressed into a single silent moment. I opened my mouth to ask what he said, but she whispered it before I could even speak. "Nothing." He didn't say a word. He just nodded and walked out. Her composure snapped then, and I realized she was crying on the other end of the line. After the call, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. Because with that single nod, I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell both of us for years. Scott wasn't coming back. He wasn't going to forgive us. He wasn't going to reclaim a role we had both carelessly shredded. That night Diane didn't say a single word. She just sat at the kitchen table staring into nothing, eyes hollow, face pale. And for the first time in my life, I watched my daughter truly grasp the weight of her own cruelty. She had told Scott he wasn't her dad all those years ago, and now she understood that some words can't be taken back. And I understood something even darker. I couldn't fix any of this. Now, years later, I'm writing this with the full weight of the life I destroyed pressing on my chest like a stone I can't lift. I once had a man who stood by me when the world turned its back. A man who loved a child who wasn't biologically his. Who gave us stability, devotion, protection, far more than we ever deserved. And I tore it all apart. Not with cheating. Not with lies. But with something far more corrosive, far more fatal. Disrespect. Because love can survive storms, arguments, even mistakes. But it cannot survive being belittled, dismissed, or taken for granted. Love without respect is a slow death, and I suffocated ours one careless moment at a time. Every time Scott's story resurfaces online, strangers call me selfish, entitled, blind. Maybe they're right. Maybe they see more clearly than I ever did. Because I was a woman who lost everything. Not because I didn't have enough, but because I failed to appreciate the abundance I already had. Scott will forever be the best man I've ever known. The best father Diane ever had. The kind of man you don't meet twice in one lifetime. And I'll spend the rest of my life carrying one brutal truth. I pushed him away, and when he finally walked, he didn't look back. Not even once. And honestly, he had every reason not to. If this story hit home, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Infidelity Stories for more real, unfiltered tales of betrayal, regret, and the price people pay when love is taken for granted. Like the video, share it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone avoid the same tragic path.